In today's video, we are taking another deep dive into storytelling to go over a piece of advice I'm gonna guess most storytellers have heard, and that is the show don't tell advice. So I'm gonna kind of give you a little bit more of again, insight on how to show not tell in your stories, again, across the media channels. So the first tip for a stronger story is to make sure that it has good components. Good bones is another way to think of this. So make sure that you have things like identifiable characters that people can connect with and see themselves in. You also want to make sure that you have a strong narrative arc. You have a clear beginning, middle, and end in your story that your audience can follow along with. Again, it's all part of putting them in that experience. And then the last thing that you want to make sure that you have there is that you are using specifics. So by that I mean you are using details that make this story unique. We are in an media environment where there are just so many options for us to experience stories. And so one of the ways that you're going to stand out is to tell a genuine story. Show us the details. Tell us what they are. These are the things that, again, connect us to your characters, but also make them unique and interesting to us. Another way to ensure that your stories are showing, not telling, is to help your audience feel suspense. So you want to create some momentum as you are telling a story. Again, I know I've mentioned this elsewhere in the course, but the current attention span of your audience is that of a goldfish. Oh no, excuse me, less than that of a goldfish. I believe it's I think it's 3 to 8 seconds. You can look that up though. But yeah, it's very small. So you've got to hook your audience in, but you also have to build suspense throughout your story to keep them engaged. So I'm gonna give you a very boring example. So I'm gonna show you how to add suspense. I'm gonna do this for you, okay? So let's just say that there's a woman. She's asleep in the house. It was an old house. Quiet night. Just so quiet. Super quiet, okay? And she hears a noise. It's a little suspicious, a little creepy. She gets up, puts her feet on the floor. It's cold. Really cold. She looks around. She hears it again. Then she decides to move forward, just really realizing again how eerily quiet it is in the house. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. You see what I did there? I basically am telling you the most boring fact pattern that there ever was, which is it's quiet, right? And there's a woman in the house and she's gonna do something. I got this advice from storyteller extraordinaire Ira Glass. And he says in broadcast, which is, again, if you're doing video, if you're doing any type of media, you want to create some suspense. And so you do it by just kind of foreshadowing things, throwing in a detail here or there. And that's how you keep this momentum of your story moving so that people don't click off or go somewhere else, right? So that's another piece of advice in show don't tell, especially if you're working on a multimedia project. The third piece of advice is to make sure that you are including some type of emotional appeal to your audience. So whether it's humor, whether it's sadness, whether it's joy and happiness or some element of that, you want to make sure that there's some raw emotional connection that your audience can make with your story. Typically, these are ways that, again, your audience is just going to connect and it will elicit that emotional connection to your piece, which will last long after them just watching it. So another way to think of that is making sure that it includes that reflective so what piece that we talked about before, but making sure that there's something for us to cling to or grasp onto to remember. And for marketers, don't make the mistake of this being your call to action. This is simply, it could be part of your call to action, but it might not be. So just remember that. Again, that those two things can blend, but it's not necessarily the same. And my last tip about showing, not telling, is to really make sure that you are pushing the boundaries of whatever medium you're choosing to tell your story. So let me explain that a little more. So you want to make sure that you are, if you have a visual, for instance. A visual a picture set has 1,000 words, right? A picture tells 1,000 words is the quote. So you don't need to say all those words with your post if you have a picture that tells a story. Now, what you might want to do in that story is provide us some context with that picture. Again, maybe at the very least put that reflective element in there so we can connect to it and know what we can learn, what we're going to take away from that story. If you have video, think of how much you can do with just sound in your video. Whether if we go back to the story I mentioned early in the video, this is where instead of me telling you that it's unearthly quiet in the house, you hear the stairs creaking, or you just feel the silence and the screen is black. So you really want to think about what are the elements of the mode that I'm creating in that I can use to bring my story, bring my audience into the story with me so that they're totally captivated. So here's an example of a story that also got some traction on my own Instagram account. It's a story about dandelions. So again, I just want to point this out about how the visual and the words are working together and how I told a story and did a lot of showing without telling. So this story is recently, I was lucky enough to provide advice for a friend writing his first book. So I just dove right into the story here. The story followed his grandpa, Odad, and the life he lived as a young boy in Germany during World War II. It was filled with the stories of survival and hope, but one keeps sticking with me. So again, kind of teeing up the story here, providing that context. There's the beginning. Second, for a little while after the family had to flee their village, they lived in a partially demolished house and food became scarce. As a little boy, Odad's job was to hunt for dandelions to make dandelion soup to feed the family. Our yard is always full of dandelions this time of year. Most people put a bunch of poison on them to get rid of them, but still they persist, rising up each spring, rising through cracks in the cement. And a long time ago, they sustained a family for a bit of time fleeing the Nazis in Germany. I look at dandelions in a whole new light now. Maybe you will too. So again, just a little story, just kind of got that element of hope. And again, doing a lot of showing, not telling about how we look at things and maybe having a different perspective. So there's an example of showing and not telling on Instagram. Okay, now I want to show you an example of showing, not telling in a video story. So this is a recent short film that I did where I chronicled a rural woman pastor, and I was kind of setting this story up. I'm not going to show you all of it, but the goal was to flip stereotypes about these women and how they voted in the 2016 election. And so this is a woman, you're going to see her here, and what I was trying to do in the first minute of the story was sort of play with some stereotypes about white rural women, and again kind of tee up Kimberly, who you'll see, who is the main character in this story, as your quintessential, like, again, fitting this kind of the stereotype of what people think of women in the Bible Belt. And so Kimberly is a pastor, you'll find that out too, but what I did with the story and the rest of the story, which I won't show you the whole thing, but what I did in the rest of the story was sort of peel back the onion, if you will, the layers of Kimberly's personality. And I built momentum by trying to surprise the audience with her story throughout the video. So I'm going to show you the first minute or two of this story, and what I really hope that it shows you is how many things about this woman you find out without any dialogue. So before you even hear an official interview clip from her, you are probably making a lot of assumptions about who she is based on what I show you with the film.
We live in kind of an interesting society right now, and we embrace a whole lot of different things, whether we agree or disagree. We embrace a whole lot of different things, and yet one of the things that we kind of buck against is the idea of authority, or the idea of just being told what to do in general. We don't like it, especially as Americans.
You're right, Abby.
Politics and religion, they always say, they're two things that you should avoid talking about, over the dinner table, and yet those are the areas that I completely live in instead. And so being a pastor and having these political conversations is really hard.
Today's picnic is perfect. And August Mommy is here.
So I hope you like those two examples of show don't tell, how I tried to work in the elements and the advice that I'm giving you into my own work. And again, I hope that you are thinking through those pieces as you begin to create your own stories. Again, regardless of medium and regardless of the platform you're publishing them on, I really think that these elements are important, and I hope that this helped you think about, again, how am I showing my audience, or how am I putting them in that experience without necessarily talking to them or telling them. Because again, I think with all of these different modes that we have now to communicate, especially online, it's really important to nail this aspect of it.